Hi, I'm Greenacre, a transdisciplinary researcher and PhD student from the University of Leeds, UK. I want to start with a statement that might prove somewhat controversial. I do not believe expertise and specialisation should be the only paths open to researchers. Instead, I suggest that generalisation and generality are not only necessary accompaniments to expertise, but they are fundamental if we are to gain a rounded synthesis. Now, I argue that transdisciplinarity can and should be the process through which generalisation and generality can occur. I could cite at length the various interpretations of transdisciplinarity, such as Niculescu, Moran, Nowotny, and co, but for the sake of time, I will define it as emphasising unity. Whereas an interdisciplinary project may use methods from multiple disciplines, transdisciplinarity aims to produce a unified account of a phenomena or phenomenons it is studying through the combination of multiple disciplines. So now I'm going to define generalisation and generality. So these are both cornerstones of a transdisciplinary process, and I define generalisation as the process of transferring findings from one setting to another. For example, findings from one discipline may be able to lead us to conclusions in another discipline. I argue complexity theory is the example par excellence of this, and in this presentation I shall draw from sociology, then social ecological systems, and finally narrative theory to emphasise this. Now, generality, on the other hand, is having a breadth of knowledge in contrast to depth. Using complex systems theory again, I suggest that transdisciplinarity can be considered as a complex system itself, which means different vantage points are integrated into a complex system. Generality is the process through which disciplines are unified. Now, those unfamiliar with complexity may be wondering what exactly a complex system is. I present a very simple definition, which shall become elaborated throughout this presentation. Essentially, and from what I've read, scholars are often afraid to admit this, is that complex systems are complex. Now, I've put a list of their features on the screen, and I shall elaborate on these throughout. Kilias, for example, provides a more detailed description if you want to look at that. And now I begin a journey from sociology to the intersections of sociology and ecology, and finally to narrative theory. This will reveal one of the key components of transdisciplinary synthesis as the application of findings to a net wider than the specific focus of a study, or indeed beyond the source of the data. My discussion will be theoretical in nature. I will draw on the works of scholars across the humanities, sciences and social sciences to elaborate on generalisation, and particularly how one might say study a complex system in the social sciences, but still be able to comment, perhaps even predict, what might happen in a complex system from the humanities. I'm going to talk about complex systems in sociology, and then I'll move on to social ecological systems and narrative systems, and I'm going to show at this moment how findings from one discipline can be transferred to another. So, Byrne and Callahan 2013 will serve as the focus of my discussion for complex systems and sociology. Firstly, complex social systems are emergent. This essentially means the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We can consider this through the lens of a structural entity, like a nation, for example. The nation takes on something greater than being an assemblage of people. It has symbolic significance, e.g. patriotism, hopefully not hateful, but it can. Agency, however, must still play a role. As Moran 2007 argues, we do not want to be reductionist or holistic. We want to study the parts and the whole. This means individuals and structure have a role in society, but as Byrne and Callaghan emphasise, they must be understood in the context of their materiality and relations. Next, complex social systems can be nonlinear. This can be understood in two senses. This is firstly in terms of an input not equal in an output, so a cause in a social system can have a ripple effect, which has effects far beyond the predicted effects. This might think of this of how an individual may cause something which causes someone else to do something which results in a policy change. A petition could be an example of this. Byrne and Callaghan also look at the non-linearity of time. For example, there can be social and natural time. Plus, the past, present, and future can connect. Consider Derrida's critique of the metaphysics of presence throughout his work. Now, social systems are also not in equilibrium. This means they are open to the environment outside which is traditionally defined as outside the system, and as such, due to the constant exchange of energy between the social system and the environment, it means the systems are dynamic. Now, as will become apparent in the discussion on social ecological systems, social systems are always influenced by external factors. This not only necessitates a transdisciplinary approach, in my opinion, but shows that societies are constantly changing. Social systems also occupy a phase space. This is the location of a system being determined by attractors and the environment it is in. However, social systems can change dramatically if key variables are changed. For obvious example of this is the pandemic, which had a massive effect across society and caused a shift in society. Now, I want to move on to another domain where complexity theory can be applied, and that is social ecological systems. I make this move initially to allow a much greater leap to narrative theory later on, but as you can probably tell, social ecological systems still have social actors, and the field essentially says that human and ecological systems are highly interlinked. They cannot be understood separately. In this, if complex social systems are said to be present, then the same can be said of the social ecological ones. Humans are not outside nature. Now, Price and Co. 2018 suggests the following can be said of social ecological systems. Now, one feature of them is that they are emergent. Without the components connected and generating novelty, there will be no joint system. The interaction of the components blurs the boundary between society and ecology while generating new behaviour. Another feature of social ecological systems is that they are adaptive. This is a bit like being far from equilibrium. Because the social system is open and is hard to define, they frequently change properties or states. I am keen to re-emphasise that ecology and society are not cut off from each other in this paradigm of thinking. Therefore, there's always a multiplicity of internal and external factors. So, social ecological systems, like social systems, are non-linear. A ripple effect is again possible. Imagine a butterfly. Now, the beats of its wings might be capable of generating massive changes, as counterintuitive as it may seem, because the butterfly beating its wings starts a chain of effects. There are a few famous quotes about butterflies in this regard, but the key point to emphasise is that the beat of a butterfly's wings may be small, but its effect could be much greater if we go along the chain of effects. Now, finally, social-ecological systems are multidimensional. So this essentially means you have to consider all the components in the system, the ecosystem, and the institutions and individuals involved in the social-ecological system. In an SAS, it is not enough to study just the social-ecological aspects. A transdisciplinary and integrative approach is required. Now, I now take a much greater leap to the humanities. This is to prove that transdisciplinary generalization across varied domains is possible. Social, ecological, and narrative systems all share properties that are similar, as you will be able to tell. By narrative theory, I simply refer to the theory of how we construct stories, often written texts, but not always. I now want to focus on a text having decentralized control and non-linearity, as they are both interlinked. Decentralized control indicates that not one part of a text can have dominance over the other. Imagine a preface or introduction. These usually assume control over a text by outlining the interpretation we should take. Ryan suggests that no part of the text has this dominance. Non-linearity, on the other hand, also suggests that a story does not necessarily follow the format of the beginning, middle, and end. In other words, output of the text is not necessarily equal to its input. The end does not necessarily equal the beginning in its form and content. Plus, they do not need to follow each other linearly. This might sound a bit like deconstruction for those who are familiar with it. Now, emergence is another factor of narrative systems, and you might be surprised to hear this because it sounds contradictory to the above. But the parts of a text can add up to a whole, even if these parts are not linear nor controlled centrally. A text is like a Moran system. A text cannot be understood without reference to its parts and wholes. The part can only have a limited effect if it is understood independently, and yet the whole cannot be understood without the parts. Now, this does not necessarily mean a text has a coherent narrative, or just that it exhibits some emergent properties. Finally, interconnection is another aspect of narrative complex systems. This suggests there are links between characters, objects, and actions. Now, this itself links to other ideas that there's no central controller because of the narrative's relationality. There is non-linearity because texts are connected in non-beginning, middle, and end ways. Finally, emergent behavior is only possible if there are multiple parts of a text connecting to form properties that are greater than the sum of the parts. So I've now discussed the process of generalization. Complexity can be found across social, ecological, and narrative systems. In other words, we can talk about one subject area with reference to another. This is important in transdisciplinarity. We need to be able to talk about different subjects while retaining a sense of unity. I now want to return to the list of complex features I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. I will now talk about the second aspect of transdisciplinarity I want to highlight, which is generality, the art of having a breadth of knowledge in contrast to depth. This, I stress, is not in contradiction to expertise. Both can play a role, but generalists can provide a perspective that sits outside a single discipline, which is pivotal if we are to understand the whole. Now, I argue generality and transdisciplinarity more broadly can be compared to a general system. Mello and Caves have already made moves in this direction, but an outlining of all the mentioned characteristics of complex systems and generality has not been done. I will now do this. Transdisciplinarity is emergent. It consists of different disciplines working together and in connection. However, the end product is more than the sum of its parts. It produces something new, whether that's novel knowledge or new areas of study. It is also non-linear transdisciplinary. If you study the input, i.e. the research, this may produce outputs far beyond its original scope. This could be in the form of generalizable results as discussed in the part on generalization, or through the production of significant and important knowledge. Every action taken in transdisciplinarity has an impact on the transdisciplinary process. If one was to study physics, then it is impossible for one to completely ignore that when studying a different subject. Physical laws apply in the macro and micro worlds. The knowledge of physics would affect one's approach to even a distant discipline like sociology, because it is impossible to escape the concepts and languages used in one discipline. Now, transdisciplinarity is also far from equilibrium. It goes without saying that knowledge in transdisciplinarity is far from static. It is always open to other disciplines, always dynamic in terms of how knowledge can evolve, but it is also true that this could be said of any discipline, but transdisciplinarity's openness makes it particularly susceptible to change. Now, disciplines or a transdisciplinary system also has the quality of self-organization. If we understand there's no central controller or discipline in transdisciplinarity, we can understand how disciplines, come together in particular configurations through their mutual coordination, and then after that we get emergence. Now, as discussed above, the transdisciplinary complex system is open, and this makes it more dynamic in its knowledge production. History is another feature of a transdisciplinarity as a complex system. We cannot understand transdisciplinarity without having knowledge of its past and general knowledge of a discipline's past. This is because the past determines the current configuration of a transdisciplinary system. To conclude this section, I want to suggest generality is more than simply having a breadth of knowledge, which it does include, but is a complex system in itself. General knowledge can only be produced through interactions of multiple disciplines, and the behaviours I was outlined above this creates. To conclude, generalization and generality are both key components of the transdisciplinary process. Breadth is equally important as depth, and in this presentation I have outlined how this might be done, whether this is through generalizable results being applied from one area to another, or alternatively through the interactivity of the complex system that is transdisciplinarity. To end, I hope you enjoyed this region to an alternate way to approach research. Hopefully it has shown reason and believe that breadth in social science is a good thing, even if we cannot rule out expertise completely. Please get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks.